A lot of big things for uranium and nuclear energy this week. A lot of things that could be happening. This is going to be a very interesting video on overfeeding this Honeywell restart. We're going to talk about some things happening with Japan and their nuclear fuel cycle and what's going on. It's going to affect the overall uranium cycle. And we're going to be talking about Australia, how they could be turning to nuclear energy, which would be a major disruption. I'm going to show you some things from the past about uranium and why it ran because of a help from Australia. We'll also talk about the overall uranium market in the US and what's happening, the Russian uranium ban, what could be happening very, very soon. But this is not from the US side. This is from the Russian side. There could be an export ban. We're going to talk about that. Some new interesting things are happening and a bunch of data I want to show you guys. Really interesting data on uranium and nuclear energy that compares and shows the energy crisis we're in and really puts a scope and a perspective where things are headed. And it's looking very good out there. Uranium did pretty well today compared to the overall market. So the first thing is Uranium Energy Corp. They're pretty much leading in volume as well as percentage price up today. The overall market was not doing very well today. We have a lot of stuff upcoming, but UEC is looking good. I'm really liking the technicals as well. That symmetrical triangle breakout that I talked about happened right on the dot. Still looks like it's ready for its next leg up. And there are so many catalysts, so much fundamental stuff to go over, including some stuff with UEC today about putting in the bid for that strategic uranium reserve that they could provide. They're eligible. So it looks like they're probably going to get that. The bigger uranium market cap stocks here, look at how much they are still down, even though they've done a good week, 20% plus in a lot of these. But look at them, 40 to 50% down. They have 100% upside in a lot of these. Just to get back to those 52-week highs, we'll jump into is Australia and how Australia, now the U.S. buying of uranium in 2020, Australia provided about 11% of that. Now, Australia, something very interesting. This is that golden swan, something on my uranium bingo card. Could it be? Could it happen? This is still, up in the air. It's speculation. But Australia, the opposition, this was a tweeted out earlier, appears to be getting ready to back nuclear for Australia. Now, Australia does not have nuclear energy from nuclear reactors. They only have one research reactor in Sydney. Now, Australia, I have some, information on this. Now, Australia did play a big part in the 1970s, that record uranium run, $218, because they had an embargo on uranium exports. Now, they were exporting a lot of uranium during the 60s into the 70s, and they stopped in a uranium embargo, right? So the U.S. couldn't import that uranium anymore. And it was really because they saw these nuclear reactors up and coming, and they wanted to hold on to this. So they thought that the price would go up, which they were right later on in the decade. So could Australia do this with their uranium or their rare earths, because they're going to need this, for their future if they are going to go to nuclear. Now, I've been tweeting out a lot of these. You can check these out. We'll go through some of them, especially the very interesting ones. Uranium facts. I'm on 14 now. And there's some big ones I did today that are very interesting and shows the whole scope of the uranium sector compared to other sectors like oil, and how we are really in an energy crisis. It's really getting very crazy out there. So this new report, the nuclear operators, the utilities, they bought about 7 million pounds from Australia. And this was last year, in 2021. So it is a big part. Now, this is just speculation, but we know that it is a possibility countries could stop exports of uranium and enrichment to the US. And we're going to talk about that in a minute with Russia. Now, Russia is very likely to end exports of uranium to the United States of their enrichment side. And we'll talk about that because in 2018, we'll just talk about it right now. 2018, with the sanctions they had, Russia proposed legislation. This wasn't just talk. This was actual legislation that they would ban exports of all nuclear related materials to the US because of the sanctions. So I tweeted this out earlier in this Bloomberg article. So Rosatom, actually, their key players, a lot of them have had sanctions put on them recently. And this was one of the things in 2018 the reason why this legislation was put out by Russia, that they were going to possibly ban the exports. Now, the chairman of its board, who is also the Kremlin's first deputy chief of staff, has been sanctioned by the US. And the board member and deputy prime minister, Yuri, has also been sanctioned. Russia could use that at any point against the West. So it is showing how the West needs to really ramp up its enrichment capacity as fast as possible. And in the Bloomberg article, it says a cutoff would affect nuclear power plants. It will put pressure on Western markets. Changing these supply lines will take a lot of time. So obviously we should have been doing this a long time ago. So another big thing I want to talk about is how Japan, which is their JNFL, Japan Nuclear Field Limited, their reprocessing plant is delayed again. And this has been since like 1997. They've been trying to get this up. It's delayed again. And now they're pushing it into like spring of next year. Now, Japan gets a lot of, pretty much most of their nuclear fuel from the recycling, refuel fabrication. And this is what they want to like kind of transition to, the MOX fuel. And this kind of shows that, you know, the supply chain is very fragile, and who knows what Japan's going to be wanting to do soon, where they're going to be getting their fuel if they depended on this in the future. And remember that overfeeding is going to be starting up next year. Honeywell's restarting, and then Urano has the max production that's going to be happening. So we're going to see the U3O8 volumes go up in the spot market. They're going to be buying heavily. I believe that overfeeding is going to start. It's going to get pretty crazy. Something else we need to remember is in fall, there are a bunch of outages. You know, a lot of these they're going to be refueling in the US, a bunch of outages, and as well as spring, they're listed here, as you can see, if you want to take a look at that. Now, right now, the US nuclear power plants are doing phenomenal. We've had, you know, crazy heat wave go through. And if you can see on this chart here, this is the outages. We are actually right now below what the previous year was. And as you see, like I said before, why uranium prices usually run up in the spring and fall. These are when the outages are happening. That's when they're refueling. That's when sometimes they go back into the market. A lot more volume in the markets. But look at that. Look, we're down to one of the lowest outages for nuclear power that we've had in a long time. So it's really nice to see that. It just proves that nuclear power is, you know, great. And hopefully other countries start, like Australia, will switch to it. Now, jumping into that, I really want to talk about today, UEC is, you know, putting in that bid for the U.S. uranium reserve to sell to the U.S. government. It's looking very positive there. Now, if we could see the production, and this is pretty much all the information for the annual report on domestic uranium production this year. If we look back in the past, really in 2014 was the biggest year that we saw close to 5 million pounds of production of U3O8. It's just since gone down to nothing. When this happens, if you even compare it back to the uranium bull market, we had a little bit more back in 2014. And some of the uranium producers, they were buying in the spot market as well and reselling a lot of that, which is pretty smart to do, especially if it costs more to mine it, when you can buy it on the spot for a lot cheaper and then sell it to utilities for higher. So that was something looking at the past. I think that the US, if we look at that past again, the chart, if we get back up to 30, 40 million pounds of U3O8 a year, and you compare that to now, think of what the market cap of these US uranium producers could be. If their market cap, say altogether was 3 or 4 billion at this moment, and they're producing nothing, when they get back to 5 million pounds, could the market price these collectively at a 2 or 3x? It's very probable. If we go back to this, if that happens, the sky's the limit, really. Whatever the market decides to put on US producers especially. But look at Energy Fields and UEC, look at their market caps, and look at where they could actually go. So I like this. Amir, the CEO of UEC, he actually tweeted this out earlier that they submitted the offer, like I said earlier, to supply the government that uranium fuel. Obviously, the program was designed at a 10-year, $10 billion plan. This is really big. And I really like that Amir has been pushing this, you know, especially with the US government. This will be big for UEC. And as I said in this, I said that the uranium renaissance is going to surprise a lot of people. And it really is. And I think that we have not even seen the tip of the iceberg where these US producers, these uranium companies could be. And that's why I talk about them so much. As Kazatomprom, I tweeted that out early in the morning yesterday. Now, their production volumes are going down. The prices for everything that they're selling are going up, okay? They're talking about supply chain risks. These are huge things for the uranium market when the biggest producer is saying these things. They're producing less. The prices that they, were dumping into the market before, lowballing the market, they're not doing that anymore. It's, in my opinion, very bullish for uranium. Some other really interesting things I want to cover. I want to show you the scope of the uranium, how much Sprott has bought, and how crazy the energy crisis we're in right now, and comparing it to oil market. So first, these 6 barrels of uranium, they equal about 220,000 oil barrels. These 6, right? Energy equivalents. And remember, uranium does not produce air pollution or CO2 while operating. And with US emergency crude oil stockpiles today at its lowest in 37 years, 469 million barrels, this is only 12,790 of these. 12,000. These 469 million barrels, that's just really unfathomable how much that is. That's at its record lowest because the US is not being very smart right now. These uranium drums, right, hold about 880 to about 900 pounds of U3O8 per drum. Now, Sprott Physical Uranium Trust has already bought up and holds 57 million pounds of physical uranium. That would be 64,000 of these drums. That is 5 times energy equivalent to the US emergency crude oil stockpile, okay? 5 times the stockpile that the US has for emergency oil, okay? 5 times. That's sput. Now, the US, as we talked about earlier, Amir was talking about 10 billion, that whole program. The US very soon is likely to be buying a lot more uranium, a lot more than that tiny reserve that they were talking about. Obviously, a lot of money is going to US enrichment, and it's going to get very crazy. So I was talking about earlier, this broke yesterday, 37-year low for the US strategic emergency crude oil stockpile, 469 million barrels that I told you before. President Biden is looking to release 1 million barrels a day over a 6-month period, right? So it's going to drastically cut that down because of energy prices. This is not going to help. It's really about the refinement. And the US is in a really crazy place right now. Now, this is some very interesting news about uranium. You probably won't hear it anywhere else. The Japan Atomic Energy Agency just announced that they have grown these new crystals, these new uranium compound, right? Uranium telluride. And they're looking to use this, and they say that it actually could work in this superconductivity, which will help quantum computers. They'll use it in quantum computers and these quantum devices in the future. So this is just another area that uranium could be used. And remember, this would instantly put uranium, in my opinion, for the US in a critical mineral aspect, because this is big for the future. Now, uranium already should be in that critical mineral. There are bills. We are awaiting the Russian uranium ban, committee, and we haven't seen anything today from them. There is a recess coming. The big Biden inflation bill is set to probably pass very soon this week before the recess. So we might hear something very soon about that. Now, some crazy news about Russia. I told you earlier. Now, Russia is, we talked about this on the channel, remember, in like March when we had those black swan events, uranium stocks went down very quickly. Now, they're firing artillery from that nuclear power plant there in Ukraine. They're using it as a shield. Ukraine's not going to attack them back. They're not going to do anything. So Russia is utilizing these plants. Now, this is not looking good for Russia because, Rosatom, there's a lot of events still going on for nuclear energy around the world, and this is not looking good for Russia. But it does also show that these plants are pretty safe. The office buildings got mortar rounds hit them, but now Russia's just being really crazy right now, obviously, but right now, I think that this just pushes more views on the overall aspect that Russia, Russian uranium needs to be banned. But I honestly think, just like in 2018, I honestly think that Russia is going to ban the exports of uranium and enrichment to the US, as well as possible, to the whole West, not just the US. So these are really big things that we need to look at. And remember, as my other Uranium Fact 11 said, all energy comes from nuclear. In this great chart here, it just shows pretty much from the very beginnings how nuclear is really the lifeblood. That's why I talk about it so much on the channel. And you know, the stocks are doing pretty good compared to the overall market. And if we look at the overall market here, majority of the sectors didn't do very good today, but uranium is up. So it's looking pretty good out there. This is my cat. Her name is Uranium. No, I'm just kidding. Her name is Saturn. Hope to see you in the Discord below. A lot of good tradings happening. A lot of people have been doing very well. Thank you so much again for the support on the channel. And have you been buying any uranium stocks or anything out there? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time.